Okay, now that we're ready to actually get started and do stuff in the class, let's make sure that we have access to all the right tools and software. This, unfortunately, requires the use of Visual Studio in this class because we are using Microsoft technology. The whole fact that it says .NET after ASP indicates that we basically must code inside of Visual Studio. It's not that it's not possible to do it without, but that really is a required piece of software. Few different ways that you can access that software, folks. One is you can come here to campus and use one of the school machines that has it loaded. Now, if you're not aware, during the semesters we typically have an open lab space. It doesn't usually start until the second week of class, which I'm surprised it wasn't running when I got here, or maybe it wasn't, I didn't notice. But this semester it's going to be in room T311, and it's usually from noon to 5. You can just come in, you have a laptop cart in there, you grab a machine, and then it's got all the IT software already loaded on it. So that's a great thing to do. The other thing you should know is there's an open lab in the first floor of the Lake Building. That's just right near the Learning Success Center, and some of the PCs in that room also have the IT image loaded on them. Otherwise, another thing that you can do, and I don't know if any of your teachers make you aware of this, but some of our IT classrooms are fob enabled, and they have these like little black boxes outside the doors. So you can sign up for a fob. I think there's a $5 or $10 deposit for it. And I think if you're interested in that, you talk to me and I can connect you with Vicki Adams, who handles that. So you sign it up, you pay the deposit, you get a little fob, and then you can come into any of the fob-enabled classrooms. Like if there's not a class going on, you're welcome to use the fob, come in, whenever the campus is open, and use the machines. So that's an option.
I think I don't remember, can you keep the fob or you have to turn it in each time?
Well, you keep it.
For the semester?
For as long as you're a student.
Okay.
You know, and the truth is, if they want to disable it, they just disable your account and it doesn't work. So if you don't return it, it's not really a big deal. The reason you do return it is to get your deposit back, I think. But frankly, I'm not sure exactly how that process works. I see more often that students in the CSS and networking program get those because they have to work on certain hardware to get some projects done. That's not always true for us. All right, but let's say that you have your own machine at home and you want to run Visual Studio. So let's talk about minimum specs for that. And you know what? I'm going to go into Unit 1 here really quick because I actually have this whole posting here. And you notice how it in bright yellow there, it says updated 7/9/2019. And those of you that took ASP.NET 1 with me during the summer, that's roughly when the course started. It's about a week after the course started. We started the course and then I updated these instructions. There's a chance I might need to upgrade them again. So I'm just putting that out there. If you have your own machine at home, you want to have some minimum specs before you begin. So the first minimum spec I would strongly recommend is 8 gigs of RAM, regardless of your processor type. Visual Studio will run on a Windows computer with less. In fact, it'll probably even run on like 2 gigs of RAM, but it's going to be so painful you're going to be frustrated. Even with 4 gigs of RAM, that's barely enough to get the OS going and barely enough to run a couple of pieces of software. Unfortunately, Visual Studio is not a light product. It really isn't. It's very robust. It takes a large amount of disk space to store it and a lot of horsepower to run it, especially when you start doing some of the more advanced things. So 8 gigs of RAM, I would say preferably an i5 or better. And I would say a modern i5 or better because I'm thinking my son's got an i5 and it's only like 1.5 gigahertz or something, and stuff is painful on there. But it's still an i5, and you could do the work that way. But you get to the point where you're kind of like, you're tying your hands behind your back and you can't do your work, so that becomes a problem. But optimal specs I would say is i5 or better at 3 gigahertz, 8 gigs of RAM, if not 16 if you can afford it, and then preferably an SSD hard drive. And given just the space that Visual Studio can consume, I would recommend like a 500 gig hard drive as a minimum. When I received my school issued machine, and mind you, like 3 or 4 years ago, and it met all those specs and exceeded them. But I had my 250 gig SSD on the second day I had this machine was full, loading the software I needed for the web program. And I told my dean, and he got us upgrades right away. I'm like, how can Visual Studio alone these days, if you do a full install, it can reach 100 gig. Just Visual Studio. Like if you want to do like gaming and C++ and all these languages, and a lot of students just like go, hey, install everything. I'm going to tell you right now, that's not a wise choice. Okay? If you are installing on your own equipment, you can get Visual Studio two different ways, and I want to demonstrate both ways. What I've been really pointing a lot of students to as a preference, and the reason I do that is because that's the way I do it. I prefer to do it this way. I just go to visualstudio.com, right, and it takes you to wherever it took me to, and they'll give you all these downloads. And you see I'm going to Visual Studio IDE, it's the first listing, and it's not Visual Studio Code. Now, depending on who you've had in the web program as an instructor for coding in the past, Visual Studio Code is a new editor. It's multi-platform, Mac, Linux, Windows, but it is not Visual Studio. It's like a light version. It is extensible and open source, so it's getting really, really popular, and a lot of people use it for a lot of different things. However, it does not have the tools and the templates that we need that are present in Visual Studio. It does not have a built-in, compiling error engine on the level that Visual Studio does. And the truth is, if you're working out in the field with .NET stuff, you're going to use Visual Studio, you're not going to use Visual Studio Code. However, Visual Studio Code is a great editor, and I always struggled, for example, because I do Mac stuff too, finding a good basic editor for the Mac, and now that's my de facto on a Mac. I know that Christopher in particular and Christian both are doing a lot of work inside of Visual Studio Code with their students, and I plan on exploring it more. But if you're going to choose a version here, you notice how there's 3 different versions. You got to be careful which one you choose. If you're a person off the street and you download the Pro or the Enterprise version, you will eventually go out of trial mode and need to pay. Those are not free products. The community version, though, is equivalent to the professional version, almost. There's like 1 or 2 little tools missing, none of which are consequential for us, but that is completely free and will stay free. And more importantly, when you're done being a student, it won't expire. And this is a new thing that Microsoft has done since the 2015 version, and I applaud them for it, because up until that point, their code editors were always attached to a really high price. When I first was introduced to Visual Studio, the price tag was like $1,500. It was insane. And so a lot of people didn't use it. The only people that did use it were people that worked for companies that could afford to pay for it. Nobody would shell it out of their own pocket, it seemed. But the community version is free. Microsoft's intent is to make it and keep it free. And the other thing that's really fascinating about it is it will also run on alternate operating systems too, but it's stripped down. So I have a little note in that posting. If you're a Mac user, you can download Visual Studio and run it natively, but it does not have all the libraries to do the work that we need to do for this class, which is unfortunate. Maybe that'll change in the future. The reason for that really is because some of the things that we do compile to the native operating system, and a Mac OS is not Windows. So all the stuff that we do in ASP.NET requires Windows Server really to propagate to a web page. So that's one option, is you can download the community version. If you do want to install the professional or enterprise version, so for example, if you might happen to also be in the software developer program, they go to the enterprise version because of all the tools that they use. That you will need a license key for, and you can download it from here and then get the license key from our second option, which I'm about to show you. So you can go here, download the product, and install it. If you are installing it on your own, I do want to direct you to this little blurb that I have here in the course shell. I'm going to zoom in on it just a little bit. These are the tools that you will need to have installed as a minimum for our web developer program here on campus. Now, for this particular class, do you need all of this stuff? The truth is no. But I still recommend they add a couple of these tools so you can do the work. So you definitely need the core editor, platform development, .NET desktop development, ASP.NET and web development. You should use Node.js because we do Node.js stuff in web programming too. You do need the data storage and processing for database connectivity. And I add these, the SharePoint and the .NET Core as extras because these are, this one particularly is the cross-platform tool, and I expect that one to grow, so it's not a bad one to have available. And then Office and SharePoint I put in there just in case we need to do stuff that integrates with those environments. And frankly, those of you that take the SharePoint classes, Brenda, you're one of them, that's something that's handy to have there. So those are the ones that I recommend and are required. Now, for those of you not wanting to use this approach, you might be familiar with the fact that on our resources page here, and I'm going to try to reset my Zoom here, I have some information for you, and I encourage you to click on that link. So left side menu, the section's called Resources. I want to show you a couple things here first. First of all, for those of you that have purchased the book, there is a PDF copy of the book there that I make available, so feel free to use that. There's also a link to the textbook source codes. If you're following with some examples and you'd like to try them on your own, you can go there, grab the code, and do it. Then I have a reiteration of that same required software listing that we were just looking at. And then we also have a couple of other things here, the VDI and the VPN. We're going to talk about that in a minute. And then I'll have a link to Microsoft Office 365, user forums for the book, and then also the textbook errata. What I used to put in this section as well was this thing called the Microsoft DreamSpark program, which later changed its name to the Microsoft Imagine program. And that was a program where students can get software for free. Now that Imagine program still exists, but they're morphing the name of it, and frankly, I'm not really sure even what they're calling it now, but instead of running it through this separate site, they're now running it through Microsoft's Azure platform. Have you guys ever heard of that, Azure? Azure is Microsoft's cloud platform that's really designed to do a lot of different things. So if you want to get a license key for the professional or enterprise version, you can go to this section or this site to get access. Now here's what happens, and I want you guys to really know this clearly. At the beginning of each semester, after the first week of class is done, our department associate runs a script that gives her a listing of all the students that are in the web program enrolled in our classes, names and ID numbers. And then she takes that list and pumps it into the system and activates your account. So this is done on a semester by semester basis. So the first week of class you won't have access. By the second week of class you should. You would sign in with your gateway account. If you've never done it before, it will require a pre-registration of sorts. And basically you use your student email account, it recognizes your gateway person, and then it does whatever it does and you're kind of on, okay? But it does require our department associate to create those accounts. Once you get signed in, I thought last time I checked stay signed in, but it's kind of neat to see it signed in too. You'll be dropped into the Azure platform. And it's a little bit overwhelming. Now you notice as I dropped in, I went right to the education section, but normally what will happen is you will land here. And I want you guys to be careful in this environment because this is like full-blown Azure. And what that means is you are able to create operating systems, virtual desktops, databases, application launches, all sorts of really weird things. And there is a trial version that you guys all have access to. But when that trial version expires, and I think it might be like 90 or 180 days or something weird like that, the subscription rate is shockingly expensive. It's like $250 a month at a minimum entry point. Yeah. Some of this is available for free for students, and I don't know to what degree because I haven't explored it to that extent. But what we need to get the software that we need for class is to go to the search window and just type education. And you notice that's in a preview format, but it takes you to this page here. And then from here, you can start finding software. So you see the section on the right here that says see all software, and you see right off the bat, you know, Visual Studio Enterprise is right there. So let's say you want the Enterprise version. You just come in here and click on that, and then on the side, notice it just pops up a box. I can go ahead and download it. But the download you can get from Microsoft directly. You can just take a trial version, download it. What you really need is this key. So when you come in here and you'll click on it and you'll grab a key, and that's my license key. Please don't use that one, but because you have your own. But what I always do with these is I copy them and I keep them like in cloud storage somewhere. I have a document where I have all my license keys for all my products. Because that license key will stay valid forever. I don't know if you're going to want to use Visual Studio 2019 forever, maybe just a couple of years, but it's free for you. And that's how you would unlock your enterprise version if you want to use it.
It doesn't expire when you graduate?
No.
Those keys?
Those keys stay active. Their fail-safe is that these products aren't going to be usable forever. And then older versions of the product become very difficult to find at over time. So I'm just putting it out there. All right, so that's one way to do it. You'll notice though that you can click on that See All software and it'll bring up a different interface, and you have a lot more accessible to you than you might think. You have access to all the stuff listed here for free. So I just want you to...
How did you get there again?
I just went to... I'll just click back. Right here it says download free software and see all software. And then you're going to take a look here at all the different types of things that you can download. Some of them are full-blown products, but you want to always read the descriptions carefully, because sometimes they're like language packs or you know, bundles of software to add on to something. It's not always the full product. So like these are Visual Studio icons, but these are agents for Visual Studio. They're not the product. Then you can search through here, and you can, of course, do a text search, but you see how extensive the list is. So you can get the community versions right here, folks. Right? And those don't technically have license keys, but they might give you one here. The other thing that I always point out to students is this section. And notice that they have like Windows 10 here. So I have one student who's in my SharePoint class that's discovering that with his Windows 10 Home Edition, he can't get remote desktop to do the work in our class. So I advised to him that he can come in here, and I'll probably have to demonstrate it for him, I'm thinking, and get the education version of Windows 10. These are all like add-ons, but somewhere, there's Windows 8, somewhere there's actually the full version of Windows 10, one of these and I'm not, here we go, education version. You don't want the N version, you want that version. And you can grab the license key for that. And here's what's really kind of cool about the education version. It's basically the pro version of Windows with some of the ultimate features added on and a couple of other tools that aren't even available in regular Windows. So higher end features like encryption and the remote desktop tool, etc. And all it takes to enable that is if you go to a file folder window here, right click on this PC, choose properties. It brings up this screen, which is on my second screen, of course, every time I do that. And let's just say, okay, so I'm already at Pro, but for some people where they have like lower versions of Windows, there'll be a little link here that'll say upgrade to a different version of Windows, right? Like in this interface. You click on that provide that license key and it will just unlock that full-blown version for you, which I think is a really good thing, especially most of our students, they go out and they buy laptops and they buy them from like Best Buy or Walmart or Costco or something like that. And those are almost always home editions and not pro editions. And that's, you know, and there's more of a cost for the pro edition as they allow multiple installs off the same license key. So it's an opportunity here if you have hardware without an OS or want to upgrade your OS, here's an opportunity to do it without shelling out any money. That license key does not expire after you stop being a student.
I did that a year ago this time. I did this upgrade with the education.
Yes.
Through Imagine, but I thought they said that when you graduate it expires. So
Oh, really?
that's what I remembered, that it wasn't ongoing. So it's nice to hear that potentially it is, because I was
Okay.
thinking.
Unless they changed it.
No, and this was a while ago. It was either last fall or last summer.
Okay, well.
That same situation, the home edition didn't have some of the things I needed from the class.
Right. So that's one of the things when you're actually, like, and a lot of people shop for laptops online now. That's like the piece they don't even consider.
Yeah.
And then you come to discover that you really need those higher end tools for some of the professional level IT work. All right, so that's how you get your software from this source. All right, but once again, you still have to have the equipment capable of running it, right? Let's say you don't. Let's say all you have is some junky laptop from Walmart that you paid like $279 for and it barely runs. Because that's some people's situation, that's the reality. You really, as an aspiring IT pro, you really need to get yourself some good hardware somehow, whether it's a desktop or laptop. But you have one more option, and that other option is what we call the VDI, which operates through our VPN interface. So first of all, let's talk about what VPN is. VPN stands for Virtual Private Network, and what that means is we have certain resources on the network here at Gateway that you cannot access unless you are either physically attached to the network wirelessly or with a cord, or from home you run a VPN client to simulate that connection. In other words, you're going to grab a gateway IP address and it will encrypt all your traffic, and it's done for security. One of the pieces of software that you can run is called a VDI. VDI is an acronym that stands for Virtual Desktop Interface. Gateway has a VDI server at our Kenosha campus, which allows students to connect to it remotely that will serve out to you a fully functional Windows 10 desktop environment preloaded with all the software required for the web program. The beauty of this is in the past, you would have to do this. You'd have to install the VPN client, and then after you install the VPN client, then you would download the VMware Horizon client that you see right here. And there's still instructions for all this. And then you'd run that piece of software to allow you to connect to that environment. But the beauty now is, when they moved it to this new server address, and you see that that's the server you need to connect to. So I have a pre-recorded video attached to this that will give you a different server name. So the video is still valid. The only thing you have to do different is put in that new little link. And then the secret about it, which isn't really so secret at all, is if you just drop that URL into a browser, provided you're on campus or connected by a VPN, that's critical, right? You can get to the web VDI here. If you wanted to download the client software, here's your opportunity. In the past, the web interface was so horrible that we never would use it. It's existed for a long time. It just was not stable. So we always told the students, just download the client is stable, it works really well. Now I'm comfortable enough with this web one that it seems to work better. I don't know what they did to retool it, but you would log in with your gateway credentials, and I do want to tell everybody listening to the video, by the time we get to the week 2 of the semester, and today is the first day of week 2, your VDI accounts are created. I usually wait till the end of the first week to see who's in class, then I put in a request, and then usually by Monday morning they're active. So once you get logged in like this, you'll have a listing of all the VDIs that are available to you. For most of us, it's just going to be this one. So you just double click that to open it, and then right inside your browser, it's basically connecting to a virtual desktop environment that's running on a server in Kenosha. If you change your browser to full screen, which I'm about to do, all of a sudden, you're going to have what seems like you're working on a different computer remotely. So I am, through the web, remote controlling a complete desktop environment that's running on a server in Kenosha somewhere. All it requires is a browser, a fast internet connection, and that VPN connection to encrypt the traffic. And that's it. Now, I haven't logged into this in a while. In fact, it's probably been since the beginning of summer semester because I rarely use it. But okay, now it's up. And just like any other computer system, it takes a little while for it to load up its stuff, right? And kind of, it's like booting, basically. Now, you see it looks just like a Windows 10 interface. I mean, those of you watching the recording at home or on YouTube or whatever, you can't really tell that I'm on a different computer. And then if you start digging around the menus here, and you see the little spinners going, you'll notice that it's got all the software. Visual Studio's already here. Microsoft Office is preloaded. It should have Eclipse and all the tools that we recommend for coding. SQL Server's pre-installed. We even have our data analytics tools built in, Notepad++ and NetBeans and yada, 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 yada. But most importantly, here's Visual Studio. It's the 2017 version. But here I am launching it inside this virtual environment. And the beauty of this, folks, is I don't need a special computer to do this. Something with fast connection, the VPN client running, I can do all my work. Inside of this environment, I can log into my Google school account, and then when I'm done with my files and I want to save them, I can drop them right into my Google Drive. If you really wanted, you could put in a flash drive and move it over to a flash drive. But there's also storage attached to these accounts, and it is being a little sluggish right now, so they want us to sign in, and I'll talk about that in a second too. But you're going to notice that inside the file manager here, there is a home directory for everybody's account that persists. The storage persists there, so you could store stuff in there. I'm not always super comfortable with that. I would kind of almost rather put it in my Google Drive and put it there, but I'm just pointing it out. So I was told by the admins of this, we're not really supposed to promote this to students, but the environment does persist, so if you change the background or store files in here, they will stay. But there's always a chance that they might get wiped, so I never really strongly suggest that you save stuff here only. But it does give you the tools you need to do the work in a pinch. Now, when you launch Visual Studio, it will ask you to sign in. All right. Because of the version that we have installed here, what you would sign in with is any valid Microsoft account. So it could be an Xbox account, it could be your same account you use to get your Office 365 for Gateway, it could be your Windows email that you use for signing into Windows. If you have a live mail account, a Hotmail account, a Skype account, just think of any kind of Microsoft account, you can use it to sign in. That's true if you were running it on your own computer or in the VDI. It's Microsoft's price of admission. They just want to keep track of who's using Visual Studio. That's a small price to pay for free, in my mind. So if I wanted to sign in here, I would use probably the one I use to sign into my Windows machine, which is just an email address and password, and I'm in. All right? So, in fact, maybe I should just give it a try. And I'm being smart here. I can actually use my school account instead of my personal one. And then after you do that step, and this will be common, once again, both on this VDI platform and on your personally installed version. Every once in a while, and I forget what their time frame is, I want to say 180 days, they ask you to re-sign in to make sure it's you. And it's not a big deal, so don't ever freak out if that happens. It's kind of like launching Paint Dry a little bit, I suppose, but here's Visual Studio launching. Now meanwhile, we are full screen, and you can see there's a little tool panel on the side for the VDIs that are running. Now the reality is out in the corporate world, so many companies make their workers work like this. They never really use the computer they're on. They're all connecting to remote systems. And there's a lot of advantages from administration and management. Plus the fact that if you can get connected online, you have access to your work environment. It's kind of a powerful thought, really. All right. Now you can see Visual Studio is up and running in the environment. I need to move on to different things right now, so I'm going to hit F11 on my screen to get out of full screen mode. And then I'm just going to go ahead and guess what? I'm going to just close it up. Now, it's probably better to actually sign out or shut down, but I've been told that it persists, so I'm going to test it later when I come back in and see if I go back in, Visual Studio will still be up on the screen. So that's the way I'll test it. All right. So that's the VDI and VPN. The VPN, if you've never utilized that, down in your system tray, and unfortunately my screen recorder is recording screen number 2 right now, but your system tray usually sits right down here. And I run a piece of software called Cisco AnyConnect Secure Mobility Client, and I'm trying to bring it up. Okay, it's coming up on the second screen here. But this is what the VPN client looks like when you're running it. Now, I can't use this on campus because I'm already connected to the network. It's going to throw all sorts of errors. But basically, if you follow the instructions in the background here, it'll guide you on how to do this. You click connect, you type in your password, and then you have that secure connection to gateway. The only little caution I'll give you is, like I was at home the other day and I was doing some BitTorrent stuff, and I forgot that this was on, and like, access denied. And I forgot that, I'm still connected to campus. They think I'm trying to BitTorrent on campus. So you just connect up when you need it and then turn it off when you don't. If any of you get stuck with this, let me know. It is important to note that Gateway requires that you use this specific VPN client. You cannot use other ones. It has to be this one. Otherwise, you can't connect to the network. Some networks, they don't care. Gateway does. All right. Now, I'm going to go ahead and go back to Unit 1 now, folks, and I'm hoping to get us started in the book. Yay. All right. So the topics for this particular unit, in the bit of time that we have left, is to talk a little bit about ASP.NET and MVC and where it came from, and then using Visual Studio. So we'll fire up Visual Studio, take a look, and then also beginning the work on the homework that's due a little bit farther below. You will notice that I do have videos recorded from previous sessions, from previous semesters, and what I was doing for classes like this one where the software versions change often is I started, both for my sake and the students' sake, indicating when it was recorded and what version of the software I was using, and my thinking is this. Let's say you have the same software I was using last year, you're probably better off following that video than necessarily following a different video that might have a newer version. You notice that when I taught it over the summer, I did not record any videos. I had a really small section, so I just rolled with the videos that I have. Right now, clearly I'm recording a new video, so I'm going to upload that here, and then I'm going to mark it and date it, so you guys know which version and software I'm using. All right, so All of those videos, if you're curious, all of them are pushed out to YouTube. So if you wanted to find all the videos for this course, you could just go to YouTube, search my first and last name, and add ASP.NET 2 to it, and you'll find all the videos, including homework videos. Because we're tutorial based here on most of the homework, it's not really an issue, like I'm giving away the answers or anything like that. So just keep that in mind. All right. So the first assignment that you're going to have is to follow the exercise that they have in chapter 1 of our book. But I want to start by actually looking at the book. So let's do that. I'm going to launch my PDF reader here, and then I'm going to go ahead and open up our book. Now, for whatever it's worth, folks, a lot of different ways to look at PDFs these days. And right now I'm just trying to get this to behave on my screen. It seems a little sluggish. So I'm going to go find the book. And I have this little effect. You see me like struggling with my mouse. If I end up looking at the screen that you guys are looking at in the classroom here, there's like a little latency that really throws me off. Like you think you've moved, but it hasn't. So I got to remember I always look at the screen in front of me instead. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and open that. I do, for the most part, prefer to actually use the Adobe products to do the reading because I like some of the tools that are in the product better. I'm using the full-blown version of Adobe Acrobat. That is not a free product. That comes with my Creative Cloud suite. But Adobe also does make the Reader version of their software, which is completely free, and it's pretty close to this. There's just a few things you can't do. So if you're looking for a recommendation, the Adobe Reader is the product I recommend. You can also look at PDFs directly inside of browser often. I don't like that as much personally. One of the reasons I don't like it is because I can't do stuff like this real easily. You know. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to actually get us jumped right to chapter 1, and because this book doesn't come with PowerPoints and stuff, what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of step you through the text and give you a little bit of lecture material to get started. All right. All right. This is what our goals are for the chapter. Just kind of really learning what MVC is, what MVC 5 is, and how we use that to create applications. The ASP.NET technology has been around for a while. The MVC aspect of it is kind of more of a modern development approach. It's kind of really blossomed over the last decade or so. And it is a methodology. You got to keep this in mind, that MVC is a methodology that we can apply to many different languages and software development tools. It's not exclusive to ASP.NET, but it is very commonly used in ASP.NET applications because of some of the capabilities that it gives us. ASP.NET in MVC fashion really is a framework for web development. So this really is a framework, and what a framework is when you choose a project template inside of Visual Studio, it will pre-generate certain structures within your project right inside the Solution Explorer. It will generate a certain set of folders and often pre-generate many files depending on how you choose to build your app, and you'll see that in a little bit. And that really is meant to accelerate workflow. When you guys get out into the workplace and you start working on this stuff for real, the one thing that an employer wants you to do is work quick. They don't want you sitting there building all this stuff from scratch when you can just go and choose a template, click create, and boom, you got like a pre-functioning website right off the bat. And you know what? That's a lot of what we're going to do. We will also in the tutorials often kind of ignore all that and just kind of work with basics just to like learn the tools, but that's how it is. How does MVC fit with ASP.NET? It's really just a separate set of libraries that are bundled in to the standard system libraries for working with ASP.NET. So it really isn't that different. It's just that when you click the create with it, it creates additional resources. Kind of the big takeaway in this course really is this MVC pattern and what that means. And you're seeing the three main aspects of it listed at the bottom of the screen here. And unfortunately, the way the acronym proceeds is not the way our teaching pattern proceeds. We really kind of go backwards, right? We start with the controller part and work our way towards the model. But the model view controller is this really what I referred to earlier as a separations of concerns type of approach. It wasn't something that was brand new. And this is the really fascinating thing about this technology. We had some really revolutionary programmers back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s who developed all this stuff, even from the conception standpoint. So you see that back in 1979, before they called it MVC, they called it Thing Model View Editor. Okay, whatever reason. And it actually stemmed from this language that's little known by most people called SmallTalk. And if you've ever heard about that language, fantastic, good for you. If not, I would encourage you to just do a really quick Google search on that and look it up. It's kind of fascinating where that comes from. But that language was built to be object-oriented and had the MVC type architecture within it way before people were even knew what these things were. But the people that developed it revolutionarily thought of these concepts that we're going to employ here, all meant to accelerate workflow and make our lives easier. All right. So in terms of what these things are, all right, so the model, okay, let's just read what it says. A set of classes that describes the data you're working with as well as the business rules for how the data can be changed and manipulated. Now, I want to make this really clear. It's not, the model is not our database. The model is the code that describes the database. It's really the best way to say it. So, and that's a big misconception we have with people. You'll see that when we get to it. What it allows us to do is create an infrastructure for working with the database without necessarily having the database in our hand. Although, I often tell my students that when I create applications like this, my brain usually goes to the database first, and then I usually build a database. It took a lot for me to learn to let go of that approach, because that's kind of what I do with PHP, is I usually create the database first and then just interface with it. This makes more sense. Here, we're able to create the code that actually makes the database on the fly and allows us to manipulate it on the fly. Really all through what we call a database abstraction layer. So we're not going to be writing SQL code into our applications like we might in PHP or Java. We will write ASP.NET code that will do that same kind of work for us, and the nitty-gritty work of writing the SQL, because technically it still writes SQL code in the background, we're just not doing it. The environment's doing it for us. And it's not cheating, it's just workflow acceleration is what it is. The view is a separate thing. The view is basically related to the interface that the users are looking at, so what we see on the screen. But think about an application that you might use in a browser and how it functions. So, it could be anything, like e-commerce, it could be just a plain old website, it could be some like social media network like Facebook or whatever. What you're interfacing with is what we call the user interface. And that is really kind of the last thing that gets pushed back to the user. So like if a user requests a page or does some sort of an action on a page, something happens on the server, some code runs, some data is pulled, gets re-amalgamated, and then we push it back out to the browser. So we have the ability to separate what gets sent back to the user from the other logic in the program. The user doesn't need to know how we're interacting with the database or what programming logic we're using to determine what to put on their screen. It's irrelevant to them. All they want is something that pops up on the screen and looks good. And it makes the most sense to develop those things as a separate component that you call upon as you need, rather than try to code it into the other logic that you're already coding. So like if you had a PHP class, what you may have done is you may have wrote like some HTML, and you tied it to your CSS, and then you wrote a little PHP, and it pulled back some data, and then you push the data into it. Here what we're recognizing is that those two things are really two separate things. And we start to break them apart because it just makes more sense to do it that way. That way, you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time you push out an interface. You're just calling upon the interfaces that are already present. It's really as simple as that. And sometimes you can choose the interface programmatically. Is the person logged in? They get one interface. If they're not logged in, they get a different interface. That's just a real primitive example. The controller, which is where we're going to begin, that's where we figure out how we're going to do things. I mean, and the name kind of speaks for itself in my mind. It controls the application. So when I interact with something on the screen, I'm sending data off to the server somehow. It might have just been a mouse click that says bring up a different page, or I may have filled out a form or interacted with some sliders or hovered over something or clicked on something where I made a bunch of choices. Then that data gets sent off to the server, and depending on what I was doing on the screen, it says, what was this guy doing? What does he want? Oh, you want to go over there. You want to go to that department over there because that's the part that handles the data. Or you want to go over to that part because that's the part that gives you the different screen. So we write the code that will receive whatever the user's doing on the front end. We look at what they're doing, and then based upon that, send them to something else. Or run a bunch of code, pull in some data, whatever it happens to be, and then ultimately put something back on the screen in the form of a view that they see. It's a separation of concerns, folks. This pattern is something, feels a little uncomfortable at first, but once you see the logic of it, it'll be, yeah, and he has a nice little box here, you know, it's a development pattern. A lot of languages do it. What was interesting is this is an approach that was used in traditional application development first, and then somebody came up with the concept, well, how do we apply it to the web? And in this little section, the author attempts to basically show you, when you're converting to a web framework, what that means for us. So you can read these descriptions too. So it says models are classes that represent the domain you are interested in. So often these are things in the database. It doesn't have to be, could be. But there is basically this, what I said before, an abstraction layer that exists in between that makes it easier for us. The abstraction layer that is used within Visual Studio is called the entity framework. Or you'll notice that they have this other Hibernate thing. But the entity framework is the one tool that we bring in, and that allows the interface between our application and the database server on the back end. What's really cool about Visual Studio, folks, is a lot of the stuff that you guys learned how to do in like SQL Server Management Studio are things that you can do just inside of Visual Studio. And the truth is that SQL Server Management Studio is just a customized version of Visual Studio, believe it or not. That's just designed to do database stuff. All right. The view, once again, well, how do we view things in a browser? Well, it dynamically generates HTML for us, depending on our code. And then the controller is the other piece that it's kind of directs traffic, is kind of the way I like to think of it. And then they have all these other little pieces that we can throw in to kind of augment the whole thing. Now I want to talk about this little box here because I think it is important. MVC, being that it wasn't something that like Microsoft invented, it really was started with a philosophical underpinning. So people kind of like had this thought about doing it before they did it. And what they were trying to do is some of these catchphrases down here, which apply to all of the MVC architectures that are out there. So if the first bullet down there is one called convention over configuration. So here's a prime example of that. When we go to build our first page here, using the example in the book, they're going to have us choose a certain template, click a bunch of little boxes, and within a few minutes, we will have created a fully functioning website that looks beautiful with an authentication system that allows you to log in and register within a few mouse clicks. Now, why? Well, to address this, really, it's like pretty much everybody that's doing MVC will use this set of tools. Let's just put them all in there. Pretty much everybody that is building websites these days uses Bootstrap to style their CSS and create their responsive design. There's a couple others, but most people use Bootstrap, so let's just put that in automatically. Most people will use jQuery and JavaScript and etc. Let's just bundle those in. So instead of sitting there and configuring each one of those components separately, why? This is what we do. This is our convention. So we don't want to spend time configuring stuff. We want to just get the building. Let's just get the building going. So that's what that's about. The fact that we're going to be using little pieces that we call upon dynamically. So if we have like similar user interfaces for similar pages, we don't want to be recreating separate pages all the time since we've already created these little pieces. Why recreate them? That's the don't repeat yourself. That's the drive principle. So if there's something that if you find yourself doing something over and over again, the point is you're doing it wrong. You're wasting time. Technology is here to make it more efficient. So why repeat yourself? All right? So plugability whenever possible. So if I want to add an additional framework or a JavaScript library or what have you to do something special on a page, why would I try to code it out myself? So let me give you an example. If I'm building a website and I want to put a map on the site, why on earth would I write a map tool? Google's got a great one. There's all the map providers. You just go out, they use their API, you type in some codes, you get a connection string and just drop it into your thing, and boom, you got a map. There's no reason for us, to go out and try to build that again. Somebody's already done it. All right? All right. And I love the last one because this is one of these snide open source kind of things. It says, try to be helpful, but if necessary, get out of the developer's way. Okay. Now you can read that a couple different ways. It's all context. Really, they're suggesting a structure to us that works. So convention, don't repeat yourself, plugins, all that kind of stuff. But every once in a while you got your own way of doing things. So we're not going to stop you from doing it your way if you still want to hand code something. Or if you do want to manually create that map tool. I don't know why, but go for it, So we don't want to limit somebody. In other words, that last bullet's really about limiting the developer from doing stuff creatively. That's not part of this architecture. There are some architectures that really do lock you in. This is not one of them. It is still, you don't want to use Bootstrap? Fine. You don't want to use our authentication system that Microsoft bundles in? Fine. No problem. Do what you want. Okay, so I think those are really pretty important little features. I am looking at the clock right now, and I know we're just about out of time. So given the fact that we basically have run out of time now, we're going to cap the lecture here, and we're going to pick up next week in the same spot. So we'll finish off looking at this chapter, and we'll dig into the little exercise that's at the bottom of the chapter. Now those of you watching the video at home, please feel free. You can read the book yourself. You just don't get all my colorful anecdotes and stuff. And you should try doing the exercise. We will also do it in class, just to repeat it and reinforce it. So if you haven't completed it up until that point, that's fine, because it won't be due till a couple days after. All right, good luck with everything, and we'll talk to you all next week.